All right, everybody. Welcome to our first breakout session this morning. My name is Jacob Betram. I'm with the Center for Rural Health Improvement with the University of South Dakota. I'll be our question moderator this morning. Our presenter today is going to be virtual, so he's going to be over here. If you over here want to come to get closer, get a better view, I'll leave that up to you. Just a couple of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, the only way our presenter will hear us is with the microphone, so just raise your hand. And if you're on the virtual chat, you can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A window. And I'll say it multiple times today, but at the end of the session, if you could please do that survey. I have a QR code, otherwise it should be on the Whova app. And yeah, so Dr. Manlove, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, I'll let you introduce yourself and you can go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Sure. My name is Steve Manlove. I'm a psychiatrist. I live in Rapid City, South Dakota. I've been in South Dakota for about 35 years. And I do general psychiatry, but I also do forensic psychiatry. And that's sort of what got me interested in this discussion today. And I'm here to talk with you about delusions, delusion-like beliefs, and conspiracy theories, and look at the continuum between those issues. I intend to, I'm basing this on some assumptions that I presume you agree with, and those are here. First, conspiracy theories have flourished in the current cultural moment. Second, that conspiracy theories are bad for our culture due to their polarizing effect. Third, conspiracy theories have a negative impact on the emotional health of individuals in our culture. And fourth, that our culture needs to give serious reflection about how to decrease conspiracy theories. So the purpose is to use information about delusions and disorders of rigid thinking. I'm going to talk about that term several times, to understand the attraction of conspiracy theories and how to reduce their power. I'm going to divide this talk into 5 sections. First, I'm going to talk about disorders of rigid thought. Second, I'm going to review known psychiatric disorders of rigid thought. Third, I'm going to discuss delusion-like beliefs. Fourth, I'm going to discuss the nature of conspiracy theories. And finally, I'm going to talk about strategies for mitigating the harmful effects of conspiracy theories in our patients and the culture as a whole. I want to start by introducing this term that was introduced to me a few months ago, called Tikkun Olam, which means repairing the world. And I just want to point out that when we're thinking about conspiracy theories, it may seem like we're talking about who are bad people, who we should be afraid of, that sort of thing. But I really want to shift your thinking about that to not so much what is the matter with them, but how do we repair the world? Because that really is our goal as people who are concerned about mental health and people who just are concerned about our culture as a whole. How do we repair the world? And if we understand the world better, I think we have a better chance of repairing it. I want to begin by laying out the term heuristic. Now, heuristic is a mental shortcut that allows an individual excuse me, to make a decision, pass judgment, or solve a problem quickly with minimal mental effort. So there are mental shortcuts, and we all use heuristics all the time. You come into a situation, you have an immediate thought about what is going on. So for instance, most of you saw this image a month or two ago, and everybody who saw it had a mental image of what was, or had a heuristic about what was going on. I'm sorry, I'm in a kind of a dusty room and got getting a little bit in my throat. Some people thought, well, this is espionage from China. Some people thought, well, this is maybe a weather balloon, or some people thought it was research being done by someplace. Everybody who saw it had some immediate reaction. Some people stayed with those reactions and didn't ever think about any other possibility, and others immediately began to consider options for what it might be besides their first heuristic, their immediate response. Same thing with this. This was an image that somebody sent to me on Facebook during the last presidential campaign, and they said, "Well, see, this proves that Joe Biden is a pedophile." And my thought was, well, that is a heuristic. That was that person's immediate thought about what was going on, but there's obviously many ways of interpreting that image. And if you stay with your immediate thought, it shows less flexibility of thinking and more rigid thinking. We're going to talk about this term rigid thought as we move along here. So what is rigid thinking? Rigid thinking means an inability to change your mind when all signs point to a change of mind. It also implies an inability to see a situation from a different point of view. So people with rigid thinking see life with blinders on, just like a horse with blinders, perceiving only one out of the countless nuances that are there. So they don't immediately begin to consider alternative hypotheses to understand whatever is in their visual field. I want you to think about disorders of rigid thinking as a spectrum issue. So on the left side, you've got normal flexibility of thought, and on the right side, you've got bizarre delusions. And in the middle, the dividing line is the ability to consider alternative hypotheses. So people who have normal flexibility of thought hear an issue, see an issue, become aware of an issue, and may have an immediate heuristic about how to understand that, but very rapidly begin to consider alternative ways of thinking about the situation. And as you move up that spectrum, there are people who have limited ability to consider alternative hypotheses, but who can when pushed to do so. And then when you cross that midline, in the spectrum, people have difficulty considering alternative hypotheses. So you see the first thing that I've got up there is non-bizarre delusions. And I use John Hinckley as an example. I happened to be at the University of Virginia doing psychiatry when John Hinckley was being evaluated for the attempted murder of Ronald Reagan. I was involved with the forensic psychiatrist who assessed him. And it turned out that John Hinckley had a non-bizarre delusion. The delusion was that Jodie Foster was secretly in love with him, and that if he killed President Reagan, she would be impressed. That is not bizarre because it is possible that that could happen. You go farther down the spectrum to bizarre delusions. For instance, the Russian or the Martians, the Martians control Rapid City. Maybe they started at Ellsworth Air Force Base and they're slowly infiltrating the city council. That would be a bizarre delusion because to the best of our knowledge, that has never happened. So you can see that to maintain a bizarre delusion, you have to have much more rigid thinking because it's less rational. I mean, and you're getting all kinds of feedback from other places that is suggesting to you that this couldn't be happening, but you still believe it. So remember that there's a distinction between being able to consider alternative hypotheses and not being able to consider alternative hypotheses. So I want to talk a little bit about delusions. You can see that this cat has a delusion. It looks in that mirror. So delusions are false beliefs that defy credibility. On the far end of delusions, the most bizarre delusions, we see paranoid schizophrenia. And this is a man who you've all heard of from the movie A Beautiful Mind. This is John Nash. And John Nash was a professor at Princeton, and he had schizophrenia. And he, at the peak of his illness, he was giving a speech about his mathematical research. And during that speech, he saw men in suits in the aisles of the lecture room who he thought were Soviet spies who had come to capture him. So then moving to less bizarre delusions, less rigid thought patterns would be what we call in psychiatry delusional disorders. Have any of you, I know you can't answer, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Tarasov decision, which is the duty for therapists to warn and to protect if there is a potential, if you're dealing with a potentially dangerous patient. Well, the woman on the left is Tatiana Tarasov, and the man on the right is Prosenjat Podar. And Prosenjat Podar had the delusional belief that Tatiana Tarasov was in love with him, and he had what we call erotomania, and he ended up killing her. Therapist knew that he was thinking about doing that, and that was what prompted the lawsuit, resulting in the Tarasov decision. This is another delusion. This would be a grandiose delusion, and you can see that Homer Simpson, he looks in the mirror and he sees this really buff, cool-looking dude, and it's a nice image for him. But this is just a grandiose delusion. And then there's John Hinckley, who I mentioned earlier. He had the erotic delusion, or the delusional belief that Jodie Foster was secretly in love with him. So now moving back on the spectrum to the left, remember that spectrum I showed you a few slides ago. Now we move to the left side of the dividing line. So we're into that group of people who can consider alternative hypotheses. So paranoid personality disorder would be an example of people sort of toward the top, but not quite past the midline of that spectrum. So people with paranoid personality disorder tend to believe that the world is against them. They tend to feel like that people don't like them, or that people are thinking negative things about them. But when offered another alternative for how they might interpret the situation, they can see that and be confident that they aren't actually being persecuted. So they feel like this when they're walking down the hallway. If somebody doesn't talk to them, they may think that the person doesn't like them, but they're able to consider an alternative hypothesis. For instance, if the person who walks by them without talking to them does speak to them or seem to be interested in them, they can take away the paranoid feeling that the person doesn't like them, and can actually feel that maybe they do like me, and maybe we are friends still. Another cartoon of a paranoid person. Again, they feel isolated and alone, even in a very social situation. And then at the far left end of the spectrum is normal fear and caution. And so you can see, we all have that, right? We all lock our doors at night, don't leave our keys in our car, and don't walk down streets in the middle of the night, in dangerous places in town. And we don't think of this as being a problem. This is normal fear and caution. So there are some forms of paranoia that are normal, but the less able you are to consider alternative ways of understanding the situation, the more rigid your belief system is, the less able you are to consider alternative hypotheses, and more likely you are to develop an entrenched belief about something. So I want to talk a little bit about a syndrome in psychiatry called the folie à deux. And this literally means, in French, this means two fools. And what it basically is a shared delusion. Two people share the same delusion. It's very unusual, but it happens at times. And I brought this picture up because this is a person that I saw in 1986, walked into the psychiatric hospital with her husband, the man on the right. And her name was Anna Anderson. And she explained to me that she was actually Anastasia Romanoff. And the man on the right was a history professor at University of Virginia named John Monahan. And John Monahan had married Anna Anderson, who believed she was Anna Romanoff. And they both believed that she was Anastasia, Romanoff, of the Romanov family. Just to give you a brief update, they were all slaughtered by the Bolsheviks in around 1919. And there was a rumor or a myth that Anastasia Romanoff had gotten away. This person found herself in the hospital in Germany and believed that she was Anastasia Romanoff, made her way to the United States, actually stayed with Rachmaninoff on Long Island for a while, convinced him that she was Anastasia Romanoff, and then met John Moynihan, who became convinced that she was Anastasia Romanoff, and they lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. When I saw her, I had a brief interaction with her. It turned out that Anna Anderson, when she died a few years later, and after that, the bodies of the Romanovs that were all slaughtered, murdered, burned, but they still were able to do DNA testing on the ashes and the charred remains of these people many years later. And they found that every one of the Romanovs had been killed in that murder. And this was actually, the person I was meeting was clearly not Anastasia Romanoff. She had the delusional belief that she was, and John Moynihan agreed with that. And I believe that in his situation, being a historian, he was so intrigued by the notion of being involved with a historical figure that he began to see everything she did as confirming that she was really Anastasia Romanoff. So folie à deux. So remember that, because it's important when we think about conspiracy theories, because in conspiracy theories, we're beginning to get groups of people sharing the same belief, right? So why would groups of people begin to share a similar belief? So folie à deux, shared psychotic disorder, it's a delusion that develops in an individual who is involved in a close relationship with the inducer or the primary case, who already has a prominent disorder with prominent delusions. Now, I'm not saying that people with conspiracy theories all are following somebody who has a psychotic disorder, but they do tend to follow somebody who has a very strong fixed belief. So at this point in this discussion, we talk about rigid thinking, and you understand that there's a difference between people who naturally look at alternative ways of understanding any experience that they are involved with. And that is related to their ability to consider alternative hypotheses for understanding the situation they're in. And then there are other people who tend to be more rigid in their thinking, who don't do that well, who tend to go with their immediate heuristic or their immediate belief about what is going on and have a hard time moving off of that. And they have a harder time considering alternative hypotheses or incorporating that into their thinking. So next, I want to talk about delusion-like beliefs. Now, these are not actually considered psychiatric disorders, but they're certainly very close to psychiatric disorders. This is a man who you all have heard of. He is Norwegian, and he took it upon himself to kill 77 adolescents on an island off the coast of Norway a few years ago. His name is Andres Breivik. In 2011, he was motivated by what psychiatrists concluded were extreme overvalued beliefs stemming from right-wing ideology rather than an underlying psychotic disorder. They felt that he did not have a psychosis, but he had, overvalued beliefs. His intentional commitment, his intense emotional commitment to defend these beliefs led to the mass murder of the 77 adolescents in Norway in July 22nd, 2011. And he is still in prison in Norway, but as you may know, he won't be in there for life because Norway does not have life sentences for murder or any crimes. So given that backdrop, let's talk about conspiracy theories. What leads to them, what they're about. So I first want to introduce the notion that 49% of Americans agree with at least one medical conspiracy theory. And I probably have some myself. So for instance, some people believe that drug companies are in cahoots with the FDA to only clear certain drugs for FDA approval. Some people believe that COVID was developed in a lab and was intentionally released into the world. Some people believe that COVID was developed in a lab and accidentally released into the world. Some people believe that COVID was released into the world as part of a conspiracy for authoritarian governments around the world to take control of the world. There's a variety of other COVID-related conspiracy theories that when you got your vaccine, there were microchips in there that allowed the government to track you or monitor you in different ways. So I just mentioned that because conspiracy theories are very common. They're not always wrong, and we've had a lot of them in our life just from the COVID discussion, but we have a lot of them for other reasons too right now. So what might make conspiracy theories more likely? They're usually preceded by distrust of the people felt to be conspiring against the makers of the conspiracy theory. So for instance, if you believe that doctors were against you or they were part of the intelligentsia that was trying to take over the world, and you were paranoid about them, you didn't trust them, that might make you more likely to develop a conspiracy theory, to have a fixed belief about them. Tribalism furthers conspiracy theory because you are hooked into a group of people that are sharing a similar belief system and maybe not having as much involvement with other people. There's a paranoid quality to conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories are often doing something bad or evil. So there's a sense that they're doing something wrong. They're enhanced by prominent people or influencers in your life. So if influencers endorse or don't disavow a conspiracy theory, that will enhance the process. So for instance, the quote big lie, which I think is pretty well been debunked as a conspiracy theory, when prominent people didn't disavow that or debunk that, it actually furthered that conspiracy theory. It's extended, conspiracy theories are extended by confirmation bias, which means that everything that you see begins to confirm the theory. You interpret things that are going on around you in ways that confirm the conspiracy theory rather than that make you question it. It tend to be furthered, especially in the current situation, by social media, because social media becomes its own echo chamber, and it becomes a way of kind of furthering this tribalism where you're only talking to people with the same belief system. And then the pandemic with social isolation even increased that more. People's only social contact was, at least for part of that time, was through social media, or that maybe their main social contact with what was through social media. And then people who are part of a conspiracy theory have a sort of a sense of excitement that they have special knowledge. They have figured things out, and that makes them kind of have a dopamine discharge. They feel excited by that. And you'll see that on Facebook, people will say, "Oh, you know, you're just so stupid. You're going along with the crowd, and I really know what is going on, and this is my theory about it." So what kinds of people are more likely to have conspiracy theories? This was a paper that suggested that they tend to be a little bit more narcissistic, so they tend to believe their own agenda more. They tend to have poor critical thinking skills. They tend to be people who have intellectual certainty, so they know what is right and wrong and what's going on, and they become very certain about that. But they have reduced inquisitiveness. They tend to have a little bit more anxiety and depression, and the conspiracy theory sometimes helps resolve that anxiety. And they tend to lack intellectual humility. They tend to believe their thoughts and don't have the ability to criticize their own thinking, don't have the ability to look at that and say, well, maybe there's another way of thinking about this situation. So when you have this sequence of events pulling together, and you have people who have more tendency to have conspiracy theories, it's like they get sucked into a tornado, and they're in the middle of that. The world is going on around them, but they're in the middle of that, and that's all they can consider. It consumes their life, this conspiracy theory. QAnon, COVID is a microchip, COVID vaccines implant microchips into my body. It begins to become all that they are concerned about and thinking about, like this tornado. If you can break them out of the tornado, then they might be able to see things a little bit more clearly. But when you're in the middle of it, in the middle of your tribal situation, the echo chamber of social media and so forth, it's very hard to see anything but the tornado. And, you know, I just want to point out that there are lots of conspiracy theories around, but violence becomes a dividing line. And from a psychological perspective, violence is a dividing line because people generally don't get violent related to their conspiracy theories unless they have even greater certainty about their theory. They're farther on that spectrum to the right side of the picture. They're more rigid in their thinking. There's only one way of considering this problem. And so and it's bad, and I need to do something violent to change it. So how might one, who's responsible wants to do something about this? How can we address the conspiracy theory epidemic? What do you do? What can you do when you sit down with Uncle Bob at Thanksgiving dinner and he begins to talk about conspiracy theories, or people who come into your office, as they do in my office every day, and have a conspiracy theory of some time? How do you begin to help them work through this? And the end of this talk is just some thoughts about how we can do that. First of all, we make it a point to let people know who have beliefs that look like conspiracy theories that you don't see things the same way. So whether a person has a paranoid delusion or conspiracy theory, or is just a really rigid thinker, I think it's important to say, yeah, you know, I see things differently. Not that you're wrong or that you're a bad person, but I just see things differently. Not saying anything tacitly endorses the conspiracy theory. just like I was saying, responsible people not questioning or pushing back on the big lie, I think furthered that and was really destructive to our political system. Secondly, suggest that people consider other sources of information as they think through their beliefs. Encourage them to look outside of the Trinita or outside of their tribal group or outside of their social media echo chamber. Getting information from a variety of sources may give them other ways of viewing issues. Encourage diverse interactions. You know, one problem with the pandemic was people got so socially isolated. We stopped interacting with people who had different beliefs. And as you know, I mean, it's hard to hate or dislike people who are not like you if you have a personal relationship with them. You know, if your neighbor believes that something is going on that's unusual, but you know, they help you shovel off your driveway after a blizzard, you know, you're not as likely to distance yourself from them, right? Fourth, identify respected leaders and encourage them to push against conspiracy theories. So it's really important that, you know, people in our government who are responsible be asked to push against conspiracy theories when they're very clearly conspiracy theories. Fifth, encourage the teaching of critical thinking, intellectual inquisitiveness, and intellectual humility in our schools. Believing something and not having any way of pushing back against that internally is a major trigger for conspiracy theories. Encourage responsible use of social media, not just, you know, getting in and hooking up with conspiracy theory people. 7, develop rules for social media which encourage intellectual honesty. Make it important for people to show scientific or other verifiable facts to support their statements. So somebody makes a statement on social media, say, yeah, well, give me some support for that. I'm curious about what you're thinking. 8, evaluating people who believe in conspiracy theories pushes them into their echo chambers. So engage with them and encourage fact-based discussion. So I would never tell anybody, even with the most bizarre paranoid delusion, that they're crazy and they shouldn't be believing this. I let them know that I value their thinking, but I see things differently. And I encourage them to think about things in other ways. So, you know, I mentioned this notion early on of how do we repair the world? And I think by understanding people with conspiracy theories and understanding how that process goes, hopefully that sheds some light on how we might approach this and how we might begin to take the power out of that. And it reminded me of this Martin Luther King Jr. quote that is such a wonderful statement, but that speaks to this very issue. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So we need to reach up to our highest person, and we need to love our neighbors, we need to repair the world, and we need to do that, I think, by understanding people, understanding what's going on with them, and trying to help them see things differently. So I encourage you to take these ideas and go talk with your friends and neighbors. Thank you.
Any questions? Online? Any in person here? Well, if not, I guess thank you very much.
Well, good. Well, thank you. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to shoot me an email. I'm happy to further this discussion if that would be useful to you. So I hope you all have a great day. Enjoy the summer. Take care.
Thank you. So next session will begin at 10:55.